Hi everyone. So today I want to talk about SPL. So it's another module within SAP GTS, and this one is, well, sorry, SPL stands for Sanctions Party Listing. And so here basically we're trying to see that the exports or the imports from the client or within their system are not going to anybody within, an OFAC or an ITAR or a Department of Commerce Sanctions Party list. Okay. Now, before we start, again, you set it up and you have to set up several things in the SPRO. However, SPL works a little differently in which you do have to do some front-end configuration. And I call it front-end because you're doing it from not the SPRO menu, but from your user menu. And so this has changed slightly with HANA 11.0. However, I do want to touch on it for those pre 11.0 versions, mostly because you never know if our client has or has not gone to that extent to update into 11.0. In our system, we do have it 11.0, so we don't have to worry about it too much. However, you might get the client that still hasn't gotten there. So once you go into the SAP Global Trade Services user menu, you go into the Sanctions Party Listing. Now, again, we're talking about these post-configuration configuration, sorry. So if you go into the master data section, here you're going to have, again, just like classification, you're going to have an area in which after you complete the configuration, you load data. That will be here. You'll be able to load, well, the list that you have acquired from, say, the card or customs info. Well, the card and customs info are now one. But you load them here, and basically the system will again grab all that data and run against an export licensing, a business partner, or anything along those lines. Now, before you do that, here is where you have the general settings, right? Now, the general settings 11.0 are here under SAP HANA. So if you go here, you have your SPL, well, S+, which is Sanctions Party Listing Screening. And here you're going to have, for example, a term, what we call the term mapping in this new version. Before, we used to call this alias. I'll show you alias basis, substitute for alias. Now, what we're saying is we're telling the system that if you ever see any of this basis, this is what they mean, right? So associates, association, well, that one's a little out there, but for example, laboratories, labs, MFG for manufacturing. This is a way for the system to understand that several entities that are on NSPL lists will have this type of aliases now, and so we're telling the system to basically pick them up should they appear on their screening. This is in order to avoid any slight changes within the SPL list, and so this can be configured into whatever you want. This is what we would probably consider our best practices. And so, but for example, your client might have a couple more, maybe maybe in another romantic language, in English or in Spanish or French or Italian or something like that they need specifically because they do a lot of business with one of these countries. But these are your manufacturing, your management, your laboratories, your department. The second one here is stop words. In this case, we have nothing. So that's also an SAP specific. Now, before SAP 11 and SAP HANA, this was the pre-configuration that you had to do. Now, in this case, because we don't have an SPL, I can't show you. But what I can show you is the SPL best practices, how it works in comparison to these menus right here. Now, if I go ahead and add this file right here, you can see the aliases is very similar to what we just saw in the SAP HANA menu. So we would put these under the alias terms. Again, there's nothing here to show. However, that's how we would do it. The delimiter would be these. Again, we're trying to limit certain small quote marks or grammar or anything along those lines that are going to limit the way that the SPL system runs its screening. Okay, so excluded terms is pretty self-explanatory. We want them to not include these in their SPL screening. The way it works when you see the SPRO configuration, you're gonna have the option to exclude the length of the words and the length of the entire name. So if it's five words that are 5 words with each word being, say, 5 letters. Well, you can actually play around with the settings to basically say, okay, if it's below 3, exclude that letter, so it's down to 4, and you play around the percentages of how much you want that hit rate to be. But then again, all that comes at the configuration level, and the only way to really determine how this works is testing it offline, which I will show you later. And so you basically need to see, you play around with the settings. So we again have a very basic best practices settings that we start off with every client, and then from there we play around we configure and we play around with the system to see what their percentage hit rate they want it to be. So best practices is usually 3 to 7%. So we go ahead and we configure that part. So say, for example, we're getting too many hits with words that are 3 letters long. So we put our minimum requirement to 4. So it excludes anything below 3 because of some sort of naming convention with one of their clients, and it's getting the hit rate goes up to like 9%. So once we do that, it could reduce it or it can increase it. But things like that is what you play with. Or for example, within the word itself, do we want it to hit 75% of the name, or do we want it to hit 80% of the name, or 60% of the name? Again, you can't really determine that from the get-go. You basically input the best practices percentages and the best practices configuration, and then you run some offline screening with client data. Of course, it's always best to use client data because these are actual names and business partners within their system. And you go ahead and you do that. So for example, again, in this case, we're doing best practices, so we would include all of these excluded terms here. And then normalization, again, is another area that we would work with. Normalization is to make sure that these, for example, dots and apostrophes are changed to the target of A. So A apostrophe, A dot are A's. So that's to avoid, for example, an SPL name saying A dot telephone and things like that. So it will take that and normalize it. Okay. Now, again, this particular menu is only for version pre-11 SAP HANA, okay? But you may find a client that still uses this, that hasn't upgraded to the latest one, so you want to get that configured. Now, the next part would be to load the sanctions party listing. Again, I'm not going to load right now, just like I did with the preferential determination. However, you, for example, choose your sanctioned party listing screening, much like classification. You go into SPRO, you configure the legal regulation, you set it up, you basically make it ready to load, but it has no data. So you go ahead and purchase the data and you load here, right? So your data provider, the type of list that you want to, and anything along those lines, right? One thing that we do know is these lists do change on a daily basis, especially maybe not the same list changes on a daily basis, but you're talking about, for example, my latest client had 59 lists, and then they go ahead and purchase another 6. So they have 65 lists from European Union to US to Japanese, Australia lists, everything that they could get their hands off, and there's even more out there. Switzerland has like a banking list, for example. Because they change on a nightly basis, and it's not like classification in which you get an update once in a while and you can go ahead and manually update. This is something that has to be an ongoing process every day. And it's very common for the client to create a transaction in their program within SAP, which allows you to do this, to automatically load it every night. Now, this is a great way, and it's pretty simple because the file itself has only one basic naming convention. It's placed in the same FTP server every night. So you just have to tell the system or configure the system, write the transaction that will pull it from that one specific FTP server, unzip it, load it, and it's pretty standard to have the clients request this, and we can definitely help. We work with their RISEF teams and get it all set up, and we work with whoever their provider is, which in the case, for example, my last client was a card, and so they place it in their FTP, we pull it, we unzip it, we load it, and it goes out every nightly. So once when business cycle starts in the next morning at 8 a.m., those lists that were updated at end of day the day before are ready to go. So all the transactions are being monitored, all the business partners are being screened against, and so it allows for a quick decision. And you may have, because of a new list, you may have 200 new blocks. However, that the system is working. So and then you go in and you manually release or not release. So that allows you to go ahead and do that. Okay. You can maintain them here as well. Legal regulation would be SPL, and so you want to look at the specific list, you go in, but in this case we don't have any loaded. Okay. Now, once you've set all this up, the data is going to be coming from your ERP system, which in our case is our ECC system, and you're going to have two sections. You're going to have your business partner and your document. So here, this is your basic SPL, this is your SPL menu. Now, one of the first things that I want to show you is this right here, offline screen, external address offline. This allows you to select the regulation S plus, select the external group ECC or whatever ERP system you are you are basically pulling the information, and what you can do is you can request from your client a file. You send them a sample file that we have, an XML file, and you tell them that you need to extract 2,000 business partners or 5,000 business partners in this particular XML format. What that will allow you to do is run, before of course you go live, the offline screening to determine if your settings that we've seen, with the percentage that I discussed before, with the excluded terms that we saw before, are correctly screening and are getting that hit rate of 5 to 7%. Just matter of fact, with my latest client, it took us 50 to 55 tries to get the correct percentage and the correct exclusion terms, the correct delimiters, and the correct percentages. Now that expect for it to be at that level. So, if you do it in less than 30, I think you're really doing a great job with trying to get those excluded terms. But every test is a little different. Like in some cases, we had to exclude words like MDT because it's short for Medtronic, for example. So we included that in their system so that the intercompany transactions weren't being weren't being stopped and blocked and things like that. So you have to cater it to each client individually. So this is actually a great opportunity to really get into the nitty-gritty of the system, mostly because you can see the display block list. And this was the first system that I went go live. So it was great for me to start with this one because you're able to manipulate and configure extensively. So it was a good understanding of how the system, what are the possibilities of the system. How far can we basically configure this to the requirements of the client. Okay. So, and this, of course, you all do in your sandbox system before you go live. And so, for example, you can display the block partners here. So we're going to run this all open. And you're going to have all these block partners. And now what you can do here for a partner, say that, for example, this first partner is being blocked, but for a fact that it shouldn't because it's your most trusted business partner. You can actually add them to a positive list. Now, you can do the opposite, and that this external partner, you should not do any business with them, but for some reason it's still in your system, you can add them to a negative list. Now, the positive and negative list, as the name suggests, will allow you to control the external business partner's screening. So positive list will always go through, negative list will always stop. We actually don't, we prefer not to use this extensively. Medtronic, for example, has not asked us to create or standardize or even maintain their positive or negative list. Mostly because you just never know. You never know when a business, if you, for example, put this on a positive list and you don't know, and 2 years later they have to go on the negative list or they have to be properly screened. Are you really going to remember if you put it on the positive list? So it's best to just keep them as is, not to load. But you can actually do it. And as you can see here, you have other options. You can release the partner. That's a manual release, and so anything coming from external partner 1453 will go through. Confirm the block, of course, and the screening was correct, so it will block the shipment. And you can rerun the sanctions party listing. Say, for example, you change some of the configuration on the front end that we showed you before, the excluded terms or something along those lines. If it's a pre-HANA system. So you can rerun the system and make sure it goes through, because this particular the reason that this was blocked because it had corporation, for example. Okay. Now, if we go ahead into the displayed block documents, that's a little bit more extensive because this is the entire document, and it will show you a little bit more. It'll show you, like, the controls. Now, in this case, if we go here, we can start SPL screening, confirm block. Again, some of these same information. It tells you a little bit more of the data here. And if we go here, you see, sorry. In this case, it got a green light for the ITAR, so it's telling, well, this is legal regulation, so we'll look at that later. So here is another area of the menu. Manually release block documents. You go here and you are able to run for whatever legal regulation you need, SPL for the US, and again, you'll be able to cancel the SPL block, and it will run this through. Okay. Yes, here is where I wanted to end up. Sorry. So once you go here, you run your display block partners, and so it's telling you that this, for example, external partner is on hold. So once you go into the details of this partner, it's going to tell you why. So this is going to say the origin, the term, the matching requirements, why it's basically stopped, right? This information is the audit trail. It's telling you exactly what's going on in terms of the block, right? No comments found. So this is telling you that here you have the matching address and what exactly is the situation going on. Now it will tell you if it's been this particular word or if it's been this particular address. In the back end in SPRO, you can actually set up how far you want as well the configuration to go in terms you want it to be address or name or address and name, for example. So yeah, so that's your basic SPL understanding. I'm not sure if there's anything else that I want to touch on. So you can display the block documents, you can release them, you can do the positive negative list. Here are, for example, the positive negative list menus. Like I said, we don't really recommend this to our clients, but some of them want it, so we go ahead and configure it that way, and we go ahead and set it up that way. Okay, all right, thank you. And next one will be export licensing.